Dear friends, I cordially welcome all the participants for this amazing webinar on the theme Hindu-Christian Dialogue for Fellowship, a series of online lectures and discussions jointly organized by Ecumenical Christian Center, Sri Ramakrishna Mission, Office for Ecumenism and Dialogue, Catholic Bishops' Conference of India, and Focal Area Movement. I am R.S. Visukumar from Ecumenical Christian Center. Let me introduce the genius and dynamic speaker for this webinar. Adisri Paramanugrahito Mahamune Vandaru Srita Mahagada. His Holiness, the Most Blessed Venerable Mahamune Srita Mahagada, is the 17th Mahadibu of the Rudra Sampradaya. His Holiness was discovered by His Holiness Yogiswara Siva Swarupa Mahamuni Trika Mahagata Mahalaya, the 69th Mahadibu of the Rudras, and was initiated to his direct tutelage with Shiva Diksha at Uttarakasi in the Indian Himalayas. His Holiness completed Adi Shila Shiksha, Adi Chitta Shiksha, Adi Pragna Shiksha from Kalapa, the seat of Dhyan Bari, the Supreme Council of the Order in Higher Himalayas, a tri-juncture of modern India, Nepal, and Tibet. During the Upashikshasana stages, His Holiness had served as a Sabhya to the Param Parishad. His Holiness was granted Nirvaha Diksha in 2010 and was consecrated as Shitala Murti, the personification of gentle calm, in 2011 at Uttarakasi. In 2015, His Holiness was enthroned as the Mahadibu of the Dikshana Marga Samaya Chara Rudra Sampradaya in obedience to the Supreme Council. The seat of His Holiness, Venerable Mahamuni Srita Mahagata in Nepal, where His Holiness also serves at the National Monastic Advisory Board. Swamiji lives an exemplary life. He is a man of compassion and dedication. He is intellectually an extraordinary teacher. He is the source of inspiration for millions of people around the world. In fact, he transformed the lives of thousands of people around the world. He is the man of simplicity and integrity. In fact, he is the champion to bridge the gaps of religious boundaries. I met Swamiji thrice in my life. Thank you so much, Swamiji, for being you. We're extremely delighted and fortunate to have you with us. I cordially welcome Swamiji to take over this session. Before I give this time to His Holiness, Mahamuni Srita Mahagada Swamiji, I welcome all participants. While you listen this lecture, please make note and type your questions in the chat box, or you can unmute and raise your question after the presentation. Over to you, Swamiji. Now the screen is yours.
Am I audible?
Yes, Swamiji.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much, Reverend Sukumar, for those kind words you mentioned about me. Well, listening to that, for a moment, I wondered, are you talking about me or somebody else? But thank you very much. You have always been kind to me every time I have met you. In fact, everybody at ECC have been very kind and affectionate to me. I take this opportunity to thank all of you for your warmth and affection you have always displayed to me. In fact, this evening, I have been told that we are joined by His Excellency, the Archbishop of Chagnasheri, Joseph Peruntotam. If His Excellency is with us, please accept my sincere regards. And it is a very great honor and privilege that somebody of the stature of His Excellency is here with us, attending today's session. Before I begin, I thank the Ecumenical Christian Center, along with Sri Ramakrishna Mission, the Focolare Movement, and the CBCI for jointly organizing this much needed dialogue between the Hindus and the Christians. I congratulate everybody who has had the vision and has made sure that this has become a reality. I'm indeed very grateful. Before I enter into today's subject, which is existence as one cosmic whole, I understand that I'll be speaking for around 45 minutes, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you have related to the subject afterwards. And before we begin, I'd like to say a small chant. We can all close our eyes and chant that. Shivam Shivakaram Shantam Shivatmanam Shivottamam Shivamarga Pranetaram Pranatosmi Sada Shivam Narayana Akhila Guru Bhagavan Namaste Pahi Pahi Jagadvandye Namaste Bhaktavatsale Namastubhyam 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 Namo Namah. That's it. So where I am at this moment, that I'm living in Nepal, when we look into the night sky, it's a very beautiful experience. We see a lot of stars, which generally I'm not able to see when I'm staying in Bangalore or any cities like that. It's a beautiful experience looking at the night sky, and I make sure that every night I spend quite some time contemplating at the deeper mysteries of existence by staring simply into the night sky. In fact, it is one of the dharanas that is mentioned as a technique for realization, to stare into the empty sky. Not into the sky with the stars, but into the empty sky or into any empty space. It is one of the techniques of realization that is mentioned in the Shaiva literature. So imagine all these countless luminous bodies we see when we look at the sky. I'm sure no human being, no man, no woman would have ever, at least once in their life, not wondered what all these were. Yes, today we have Google, today we have so many answers to the questions, who they are, what they are, We have even the precise distance from Earth to one of these luminary bodies too. But imagine a time before Google, imagine a time before all this connectivity. Even in those days, in those times, men and women, people would have wondered what all these were. Modern physics has definitely given us a glimpse into the reality of these luminous bodies, if not fully, at least to a level which they have understood this. And every civilization who have come before us have attempted to give answers to these questions, to these existential questions, using the available tools of their times, their respective times. Along with this larger existence, the question of this larger existence, there also existed the question about one's own personal identity. And whenever the question of personal identity arises within the minds of human beings, it is invariably linked with the idea of what is my place in this larger universe? What is the scope of my existence? And all these particular wonders were there in existence at all times. All civilizations have gone through it. In Bharatavarsha, who we call as rishis, the ancient seers or sages, as we call them in English, concerned themselves with these questions, not as a passing thought, but as a systematic exercise. They looked into the details of it, and the answers they discovered are collectively called Shruti. This is a very important word when we talk anything about Sanatana Dharma, because everything that we know as Sanatana Dharma, by the way, the word Hinduism, we call this well-known word Hinduism, the actual word, the actual words that denominates the people who follow this ancient Dharma are the people of Sanatana Dharma. The name Hindu is a much later name, probably not very old. It has a colonial leftover, it could be termed as a colonial leftover. But as everything else, we continue to use it. But the right words describe the people of Dharma, the people who follow the path shown by the rishis, are called the people of Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana means eternal. Dharma means that which supports you in your day-to-day life, that which supports you in every manner. So it cannot be equated to what we call as religion in the modern sense of it, because its existence predates the evolution of any modern religion. So these answers which were received by the rishis are called Shrutis because it is considered as heard directly and perceived, so intuitively heard. This intuitive awareness of the rishis is categorized as the Shrutis. This paves the way, the basis for anything else that has evolved in the fold of Sanatana Dharma. The ways of life which emerged around the Shruti gave rise to the various schools of Sanatana Dharma. As you know, the people of Sanatana Dharma do not follow a homogeneous lifestyle, a homogeneous worship methodology. None of these are existent in Sanatana Dharma. There are various schools of thoughts, there are various worship patterns, there are multifarious gods and goddesses, there are systems where gods and goddesses are not present. So multiple schools are present in the Sanatana Dharma. But all these have one thing in common. They all evolved out of the intuitive awareness of the rishis or the Shrutis. And all the schools agree about one thing, and that is existence is indivisible. Existence cannot be divided. This is one common agreement all schools have. Now, regarding this, the oldest reference we can find in the Rig Veda itself. As you know, out of the Shrutis, we have four texts called the four Vedas, Chatur Vedas, Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Sama Veda, and Atharva Veda. Of this, the Rigs are present in the book called Rig Veda. Again, it became codified into book form or written form much, much later. Originally, these were all passed verbally. I mean, from generation to generation, it were passed. And again, that's another way of Shruti, heard from one generation to the other. So in the Rig Veda, 10th mandala, there is a hymn called Hiranya Suktam, Hiranyagarbha Suktam. In that it says, I'll just say the first part of the Suktam, Om Hiranyagarbha Samavartatagre Bhutasya Jatah Patireka Asit. This is the starting point of the Hiranyagarbha Suktam. And this means the golden womb came into being. Hiranya means golden. Garbha means womb. The golden womb came into being. Now, I'm not going to chant or recite the rest of the Suktam to you, but I'll tell you a few important points that are mentioned in this Hiranyagarbha Suktam. The characteristics of this golden womb is described in the Suktam itself. The number one of all, it is that this Hiranyagarbham is all pervading. In Sanskrit, it is called Vishwavyapi. All pervading. Then it is all pervasive. Trivikrama. Trivikrama means it is present or it will pervade into at least three lokas, three Vikrama. Self-luminous. Sahaja Prakashatva. It is also the causal ocean. It is and this is called Narayanatva. And it is the sacrificial person, Yajnaya Purusha. It is the master of the universe, Vishwapati, protector of beings, Praja Rakshaka, provider of fruits, Sakala Phala Pradata, and the totality of truth and righteousness, Satya Dharmadi Purna. So these particular characteristics are described in 8 ashtakams or 8 mantras in the Hiranyagarbha Sukta describing the golden womb. Here we can see that from the characteristics which I just mentioned of Vishwavyapitva, Trivikramatva, Sahaja Prakasha, Narayanatva, Yajna Purusha, Vishwapati, Prajarakshaka, Sakala Phala Pradata, and Satya Dharmadi Purna, we can see that Hiranyagarbha is not only the evolvent, but also the evolute. Evolvent as well as the evolute bundled into one thing. So remember, the subject we are discussing today is existence is one cosmic whole. I told you when I was referring to the Shrutis, I told you that all the schools which were developed around the Shrutis agree that existence is indivisible. And this is the first or the earliest reference we are seeing from the Vedas itself. And this is from the Rig Veda, 10th mandala. And here we can see that the evolvent as well as the evolute, that from which everything evolves, and that which is becoming evolved into or becoming into something, it's all one and the same. There is absolutely no difference. And it is termed as Hiranyagarbha. Now, again, in the same mandala, you also see another suktam called Ambrini Suktam. Ambrini Suktam. In that, I'm not going to recite it. I'll just give the translation, rough translation to you. I myself breathe forth like wind, giving form to all the universes, beyond the heaven, beyond the earth. So vast am I in my greatness. Once again, I myself breathe forth like the wind, giving form to all the universes, beyond the heaven, beyond the earth. So vast am I in my greatness. So these rigs are from the hymns known as Hiranyagarbha Suktam and Ambrini Suktam, as I've already mentioned. So the first part, you see something which is bundled into one. And the second part, it is telling it's pervading everything, and it is talking about its own greatness. So these two mentions, or in the suktams, which you find in the 10th mandala of the Rig Veda, can be treated as the basis of the linga worship of Shiva and Shakti. If you look at the modern temples of the Sanatana Dharma, the oldest murti which we have been worshipping can be called the Shiva Linga. It is in the top part, it looks like a womb, like an egg, and the bottom part is like a receptacle. So this, most of you, those who are familiar with this imagery, and this is the basis, the Vedic base of the worship of the Shiva Linga. So it is the Hiranyagarbha and the Ambrini, the Devi, the Shakti that you are worshipping through in a physical form through the Shiva Linga. So the wholeness of existence, being, becoming, reality are not only found in these two hymns. You also find other suktams like the Purusha Suktam, Narayana Suktam, etc. in the Rig Veda, which mentions about the wholeness of existence. Since we have limited time, we cannot go into all those things, but later you can refer to all those things, all these suktams, the Purusha Suktam, the Narayana Suktam, etc. This is as the rishis or the ancient seers have seen, heard, and experienced. So this forms the basis of the Shruti. And as I told you, the basic qualification that anybody to belong to Sanatana Dharma, or if anybody has to consider himself or herself to be belonging to Sanatana Dharma, is only if that person adheres to what has been mentioned in the Shruti. Because the Shruti forms as a basis for everything that we have developed afterwards. The systems, there are so many systems which developed around the Shrutis. And these systems are, or philosophical schools, philosophical systems, these are called in Sanskrit language, it is called the darshanas. Every system in the Sanatana Dharma is focused on describing this wholeness, this oneness described in the Shruti to fit into the mental and intellectual scope of human beings. As we know, not all human beings are all on the same level. Everybody do not understand the same thing in the same manner. So the ancients always recognized the difference between different mental and intellectual understanding, the scope of human beings. And they have always ensured that various darshanas were developed around the Shrutis in order to suit the needs of all these particular mental and intellectual capabilities of the human beings. So which are these 6 darshanas? These 6 darshanas are called Mimamsa, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Yoga, and Uttaramimamsa. Uttaramimamsa today is popularly known as the Vedanta, but we call it in official Darshana system, we call it as the Uttaramimamsa, because the first Mimamsa, we call it the Purvamimamsa. So it starts with the Purvamimamsa and the Darshanas comes to a culmination with the Uttaramimamsa. So the word Vedanta, some people use, but generally when we speak of the Darshanas, we refer to it as Uttaramimamsa. So what is Mimamsa? Mimamsa is a systematic inquiry. You inquire in a very systematic manner. When I began this presentation, I told you that the ancient seers systematically inquired into the existential questions or the existential ideas. And as a result, we receive the Shruti. So Mimamsa is a further elaboration, or as a philosophical system, it's a further elaboration or the systematic inquiry. In the Nyaya Darshana, logic and method is employed. Without logic and method, nothing can be understood. So logic and how to employ logic and methodological approach is what Nyaya is concerned about. Vaisheshika, the Darshana of Vaisheshika, breaks down the macrocosm. The macrocosmic existence is broken down into understandable levels so that everybody can relate to it. That is the idea of Vaisheshika. Now, Sankhya gives the metaphysics here, the ontological, metaphysical ideas are described in Sankhya Darshana. Then comes yoga. What is yoga? Yoga is one of the most popular words here and in today's world. Recently, in the month of June, we celebrated the International Yoga Day too. But that part of the yoga is celebrating only one section of the yoga, the physical aspects of yoga. Yoga in itself is a darshana, a philosophical school, where a systematic path or pattern is given to realize the whole. How to realize the whole? What are the practical things you have to perform on a day-to-day basis, physically, mentally, as well as spiritually? This is what yoga is concerned with. And then comes Uttaramimamsa. Uttaramimamsa is the consummation of all what is described. Any descriptions which are given by the seers, the inquiry that has gone into it, the logic, the reasoning, the breaking down, the path which is followed, everything consummates in the school of Uttaramimamsa. So this is how the 6 darshanas are conjoined. His Holiness Mahamuni Vandaru Kavikratu Mahagata of the 49th Mahadibhu of the Rudra Sampradaya always described that 6 darshanas has to be looked at as 6 keys which have to be used in conjunction with each other in order to open the box of treasure. His Holiness always used to remind, of course, long ago, this is what we say in the Sampradaya, that if all the 6 keys are not used together, if you take one key to be important and if you know how to operate the key, the treasure chest will not open. If the treasure chest has to open, all the keys has to be used in conjunction with one another. And this is what His Holiness Mahamuni Vandaru Kavikratu Mahagata used to say. Now let's go further. The suktas, when they speak, are formulations which have to be actualized. This brings us to the 3 modes of worship in Sanatana Dharma. How are the worship system formed in the Sanatana Dharma? There are 3 important modes of worship. The one is called mantra, the second one is called yantra, and the third one is called tantra. Mantra, yantra, tantra. Mantra is the form of worship by means of yajnas. Yajnas are where the yajnopasana is a kind of worship where the gods and goddesses from the Devaloka are invoked. The Rig Veda, the Yajurveda, the Samaveda are used in offering oblations to the Devas. This kind of upasana is called Yajnopasana. This falls under the category of the mantra form of worship. Now comes the yantra form of worship. The yantra form of worship is a way of worship using the means of devalayas. Devalayas in today's language can be translated to temples, the homes. Alaya means home, deva means God, the home of gods. So yantra worship is generally performed in a home of the god. So there, any yantra can be used in order for the actualization. And Tantra is the form of worship by means of rigorous discipline. Tantric worship requires rigorous discipline to be followed. So these are the three modes of worship that has evolved in the Sanatana, and any kind of other patterns which you see today, mantra of the japa or anything which you see today, all falls under one of these three categories. Okay, so the yantra worship is also called aradhana, because there the idea of devotion, etc., evolves. Various forms. What is a yantra? Yantra is a various personification of the divinity. That is what. In a yantra, you personify the divinity through prana pratishtha or some other means. You invoke the divinity to come and dwell in the particular yantra so that you can pay your obeisance to that particular yantra. So this is that. Therefore, this is also called aradhana. In tantra, discipline. That's the only thing that is asked in Tantra. There are multiple steps. The Guru will initiate you into the various steps, but rigorous discipline. It is very important in the Tantric system. Anybody who is unable to keep up the discipline, they're not fit for the Tantric worship, the Tantric way of worship or the Tantric sadhana. Even when one of the three is prominent, depending on the mental disposition and constitution of the seeker, the other two are always inherently present. As I told you earlier also, all these modes are developed to suit the various dispositions. Not everybody have the same mental disposition. Not everybody's physical constitution is one and the same. In Ayurveda, one of the Upavedas, we always say about the different prakritis, the Vata prakriti, the Pitta prakriti, and the Kapha prakriti. These are the three different prakriti, the physiological constitution. There is a difference. Then again, when we talk about the qualities, the gunas, we speak about the Sattva guna, the Rajo guna, and the Tamo guna. So again, the qualitative difference in the mental disposition, the physiological disposition, all these things happened because of this varied things. And so everybody cannot follow the same kind of or same mode of worship. It will not suit them. That is why these three modes of worship is present to suit the particular needs of the particular people. And that is why it's also said that despite choosing one of the form, the other two are inherently present. So one is not superior to the other, or one is not inferior to the other. It's all three are present even when one is dominant. Okay, so my Guru Maharaj, His Holiness Trika Mahagata, used to tell that when we were meditating or when we were practicing, he always used to ask, like, did you see the murti in the mantra today? And we used to stare at him, give a blank face like this to him. He used to ask, like, did you see the murti in the mantra? When you are starting your practice, you don't know what is murti, what is mantra. And as it is, when we are perplexed, he asks the next question, did you see the tantra in the murti? So every time, if he showed a blank face, he used to just tell us that, you know, practice with more vigor. That was his favorite thing. Practice, give more vigor to your practice. When you practice with more vigor, you will be able to see all these three together. You won't feel any differentiation between one mode or the other. All three will come alive. So you always see the murti in the mantra and the tantra in the murti. That's it. So His Holiness always used to encourage us with so much of love and compassion when we were not faithful enough in our practice. So the whole focus that His Holiness maintained was that there was always vigor in our practice, and we were not sitting there idly and, you know, daydreaming, thinking that we were meditating. So every day this question used to repeatedly happen. So the three modes, basically the whole idea is the three modes are one and the same. Now, another concept in Sanatana Dharma, which you are very familiar with, is most of you would be familiar with this. This is Purushartha. There are 4 Purusharthas: Kamam, Artham, Dharmam, and Moksham. Kama, Artha, Dharma, Moksha, the 4 Purushartha. So, just quite in the beginning, I told you one of the questions was also about the personal existence, not only the larger existence, the existence of the universe, but also what is my place in the whole system. So the question of meaning, identity, etc. comes here. The simple answer, those who truly know Sanatana Dharma will tell that what is the meaning of life? The meaning of life is nothing other than the Purushartha itself, or the Purushartha themselves. And again, one cannot be excluded. Kamam, Artham, Dharmam, Moksham, all 4 Purusharthas are equally important. We human beings, let's talk only about, from all the other sentient beings, let us now talk only about the human beings, because we are having a human discussion here. The embodied self, which is a sentient being, a human being, desires objects. And this desire is called kama. It is all, like, negatively understood and wrongly interpreted as lust and all by people. It's kama means the desire which a sentient being or the embodied self desires. Any desire falls under the category of kama. In the Shaiva system, we obviously even the desire for the Brahma falls under the category of kama if it is not adequately purified. If adequately purified, even the desire for any mundane object like gold or sex or anything, even that can fall under the category of moksha. So it all depends on the level of purification that one achieves. So anything, so the desire for even Brahmanandam can fall under the category of the first Purushartha Kamam, if not properly understood, if not properly purified. Now, these objects which you desire for, which the embodied self is desiring for, have to be obtained. And obtaining requires means. And this means is called artham. Kamam, artham. So just by desiring something, I want that, I want this, I can't get it. Nobody can get it. You have to find a way to obtain it. That way to obtain it, or obtaining that, is called artham. And now again, based on the dispositions, people will fall into categories, which categories they are falling into in order to obtain those particular desires. But one thing is very clear. Any pursuit for any object cannot disturb the inherent order. There is a system in place, there is an order in place. This cannot be disturbed at any cost. And this particular fact is emphasized in the third Purushartha called dharma. Dharma gives you the total support. And dharma cannot be disturbed. So not disturbing the order, there is code, conduct, everything present, and that is what dharma is. And underneath all pursuits, one's wholeness, one's completeness, one's totality is always present. This is what is called moksha. The substratum is called moksha. So Purushartha, two, as I told you, do not exist in isolation of each other. No individual can live without all 4, but the intensity varies. This depends again on the constitution, the mental disposition, etc. Now, you're also familiar with another terminology which is in the Sanatana Dharma. It's called a Varnashrama. Varnashrama consists of 4 ashramas. They are the Brahmacharya, the Garhasthya, the Vanaprastham, and the Sannyasa. these 4 ashramas facilitates the Purushartha. These 4 ashramas are designed so that every individual, every embodied being, every human being can, experience the Purusharthas in the right way. Now, I've been speaking about the Shruti so far. What does the Smriti say? When we talk of the Smriti, one text comes into everybody's thought immediately, and that is Bhagavad Gita. Very popular in today's world. Almost everybody has seen Bhagavad Gita, touched Bhagavad Gita, read Bhagavad Gita, or heard Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, out of the 18 discourses which are there in that, the 11th discourse is called the Vishwarupa Darshana Yoga, the yoga of the vision of the cosmic form. This entire discourse is dedicated to the idea of cosmic whole, and it is worth studying. Anybody who's interested in the idea of the entire existence as one being, we should definitely study this discourse, the 11th discourse of the Bhagavad Gita. So in this, we see that Arjuna, when he had the desire to see the true form or the cosmic form, Krishna, as the representative or the personification of the Param, the absolute, grants Arjuna something called the divine eye, Divya Chakshu. So Arjuna is granted the Divya Chakshu, so that, because with the ordinary eye, Arjuna would not have been able to see the Vishwarupa or the cosmic whole. So granted the divine eye, Arjuna saw the cosmic form. And it's a big chapter, but I'll just mention one line here. Arjuna saw the diversely differentiated existence united in the one cosmic form. Everything which is categorized into different things, classes, beings, objects, etc., this diversely differentiated existence united in one cosmic form. That's what Arjuna saw when he was granted the divine eye. And Arjuna also declares how he lost the spatial sense. He lost any sense of space having seen the cosmic form. He could not differentiate from top to bottom, left to right, side to side, north, south, east, west, nothing. He lost all sense of direction. This is, Arjuna is telling this to Sri Krishna in their interaction, which is mentioned in this 11th discourse, that I have lost all spatial sense having seen the Vishwarupa. So that this leads us to another central principle in the Sanatana Dharma. Existence is the absolute self itself. So what is existence? Everything that we see around us, including me, including you, every object you can touch, feel, breathe, whatever, see, not see, everything, the entire universe, the multiverse, it is the absolute. It is not different from the absolute. Existence is the absolute itself. This is a central tenet of Sanatana Dharma. This has to be understood very clearly, because if you do not understand this, it's very difficult to understand what we are trying to say in the Sanatana Dharma. Existence is absolute itself. Sri Krishna, in the 11th discourse, calls this absolute as Kalosmi, Mahakal, the mighty time. And everything that appears in it, everything that appears in the mighty time is the time itself. There is absolutely no difference. So Sri Krishna, once revealing the cosmic form to Arjuna, is no more talking in the spatial sense, but in the sense of time. Here comes the idea of Mahakal, the great time, and everything that appears in it, including you, me, everything with a name and form, is not space in reality, but time itself. This is a very unique concept. This is very central when you go into the depth of how Sanatana Dharma describes existence. So we have to look at everything not from the eyes of space, but from the eyes of time. This is why, another reason why you generally don't find the ideas of good and bad in Sanatana Dharma. Nothing is categorized as, bad, eternally bad, eternally good. No such concepts are there. For practical purposes, there may be good and bad, but not in an eternal sense, not in a sense of totality. The good and bad are not present, because everything that appears is the absolute itself. How can the absolute be good or bad? Absolute can neither be good nor be bad. Absolute is absolute. It cannot have such attributes. It cannot be limited. The moment you categorize anything into the category of good and bad, you're categorizing the absolute itself. So it falls into a category of ignorance. It becomes a mala, an ignorant understanding. So we have to stay clear of that. So when the absolute cannot be limited into good or bad, sentient experience too cannot be termed as suffering. This is another interesting aspect of Sanatana Dharma. There is no concept of suffering in Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana Dharma, especially the Shaivites, I belong to the Rudra Sampradaya in the Pashupata school. We do not look at life as a suffering at all. There is zero suffering in life. Life is an absolute bliss at all times. This is another central principle. So there is no concept of suffering here. It need not be qualified. It simply is. Absolute cannot be qualified. Absolute is simply is. There are people who perceive existence or sentient experience as the expression of the absolute. They feel that the absolute is being expressed in the sentient experience. This notion is acceptable. It is not completely denounced. It is acceptable, but acceptable only on the preliminary level. But on the level of reality, the level of actuality, the absolute has no compulsion or no need to express itself. Therefore, there is no need to look at life or sentient experience as an expression of the absolute. There's no problem in looking at it that way, but it is not completely true when you say that life or sentient experience is an expression of the absolute. It is. We have to, if we need to be liberated, we need to understand that life is absolute itself. Right now, as you are, what you are, who you are, it is the absolute itself. There cannot be any differentiation. Therefore, everything that is in existence is the absolute itself. Everything that is not in existence too is the absolute itself. We come across the concepts of Vyakta Prakriti, Avyakta Prakriti, etc. in the Sankhya metaphysics, in the Sankhya Darshana. So we can look into all those things, but we do not have so much of time to go there. So I'll just mention it here in this way. The question on why moksha is important naturally arises. And I say, like, everything is existence. Everything in existence as you are right now is absolute itself. You ask, why do you need the fourth Purukshartha, the moksha? What is the need for it? Like, because everything is as good as it is. So the answer itself is moksha is the fourth Purushartha. Nobody is saying anywhere that moksha is the final goal of life or it is the only aim of life. It is one of the Purushartha. So it is Just as for completion, you need to experience all the 4 Purushartha, moksha too, because when a little later I'll explain the concept of Tirodhana to you. When the concept of Tirodhana is explained, you'll understand why moksha comes into the picture. So here we go into the concept of Jagadananda. It's very important in the Shaiva school. Jagadananda is used in Tantra as all our modes of cognition are the absolute itself categorized as Chit. When all our modes of cognition, any mode of cognition we have within us, within our capacity, is experienced or experience everything as the absolute itself, then it is called Jagadananda. This is possible through the Chit. Again, the consciousness has the Shakti. It has 5 modes, and the first mode is called the Chit. The second mode is called Ananda. The third mode is Icha. The fourth mode is Jnana, and the fifth mode is Kriya. So 5 modes are there, and in that the first mode is Chitta. And in the Chitta, when everything externally, internally, everything you see without any kind of discrimination, when you can see everything as the absolute itself, a person is existing in what is called Jagadananda. This is the actual state. I told you earlier that there is no suffering. The reason for that particular declaration that there is no suffering is that everything is Jagadananda. Chitta and Ananda are 2 modes of the Shakti. These categorizations actually do not exist. They are used only to make it cognizable to the mind. Remember that as well. And all the categorizations are submerged in the absolute consciousness, Paramashiva. The absolute consciousness, we call it as Paramashiva. When all the categorizations are submerged in Paramashiva, the sentient awareness is Jagadananda. The sentient awareness gets transformed into what is called Jagadananda. Jagat means the whole of existence. Ananda means bliss. This process, we call it as Karma Mudra. The process by which we arrive at Jagadananda is called Karma Mudra in Tantra. This state is independence. Independence or Swatantriya. Swatantriya is another important concept in the Tantra, where the sentient being completely enjoys the being of the absolute. The Pashupata masters state that this enjoyment or bliss is immanent in all sensory experience. So the absolute Ananda is immanent in all sensory experiences. To understand this, one must also take into account, as I told you already, the other modes, the Icha, which is the volition, the Jnana, which is the cognition, and the Kriya, which is action. When any of these are shrunk, this is called Tirodhana or Sankocha. Another word which is used is called Sankocha. When Tirodhana, when the absolute shrinks itself, the sentient play begins. It takes the identity as a different being, or it considers itself to be a different being, different from the absolute. In this particular play, the ideas of suffering, freedom from suffering, I am suffering, I am enjoying bliss, etc., emerges. So the absolute Paramashiva has to perform a function. This is one of the eternal functions, a function called Tirodhana. When it is performed, the 5 modes start shrinking. And when this Sankocha happens, the play begins. We call everything as a play, a divine play. Or some people call it as a magic trick, as a trick, play, whatever you call it. The divine is playing. When I'm drinking water, it is the divine drinking water. So it is this play. The divine itself is enjoying the play. in different forms, in different names, in different, using different means. Now, I have to, before I stop, I have to mention about Shiva and Shakti here. You all have heard, and many people think that Shiva and Shakti are two different beings, or two different, one is male, one is female, etc. But these two are perfect identification, are in perfect identification with each other, like fire and its inherent potential to burn. Fire has the potential to burn. If it cannot burn, then it is not fire. So Shiva and Shakti are like this, fire and the potential to burn. The two can only be separated in our thought and nowhere else. It's always one and the same. This is represented in the Puranic texts, where the gods and goddesses, along with Brahma, Vishnu, and Shankara, projects their innate power to manifest a powerful, luminescent female form. You all would have heard of the story in the Purana about Mahishasura Mardini. When the Devas were disturbed, when the order of when Dharma was disturbed by the leader of the Asuras called Mahishasura, and he wanted to preside over all the functions, displacing Indra from his job, Varuna from his job, Aryaman is displaced, Agni is displaced, Vayu is displaced, everybody is displaced, and declared himself to be the Adhisha of all this order. So Dharma was disturbed. When Dharma was disturbed, all the gods and goddesses approached the Trimurtis. The Brahma is considered as the grandfather of the Devas, and along with Brahma, Vishnu was approached, Shankar was approached, and all these people could not defeat Mahishasura. So then all of them projected their tejas together. When their tejas, that is the innate power, was projected into one common place, it manifested into powerful light form, a female form. This is called the Simhavahini Bhavani. This is what the idea of Shakti is. So don't confuse that this manifestation is not created by all those people together, but what was innate in them, what was within them, they just projected it outside. This Simhavahini is called Bhadrakali. This same Bhadrakali, as we see in the Puranic text, as we see, this same Bhadrakali takes the form of Kali later. The yoginis, the 64 yoginis, the Saptamatrikas, etc., while retaining the original Simhavahini form. The Simhavahini form was not destroyed, it was not removed. That form was as it is retained, and the new forms also came into play, and none of the forms which came into play were destroyed. All of them stayed together at the same time and made sure that the task was accomplished. The task was the destruction of the Asuras who challenged the cosmic order, the natural order of things, the Dharma. So depending on what one wants to project, the projected plays accordingly. So we can say that the ones who were projecting can be called Shiva here, and the one who is being projected can be called the Shakti. So depending on what one wants to project, the projected plays accordingly as stated in the text. I will read that small text to you. Yashri Swayam Sukritinam Bhavane Lakshmi Papatmanam Kridadhyam Hrideshu Buddhihi Shraddha Satam Kulajana Prabhavasya Lajja Tam Tvam Natahasma Paripalaya Devi Vishwam. Simple text. In the dwellings of doers of auspicious deeds, she is Lakshmi. In the dwellings of doers of inauspicious deeds, she is poverty. In the hearts of those with pure mind, she is intelligence. In people of holiness, she is faith. In people of exemplary behavior, she is humility. So here in the Purana, this is from Markandeya Purana, it is said that the same Shakti behaves in different ways with different people, because of the character or because of what the embodied being wants to project. Somebody who's interested in performing auspicious needs definitely wants to project accordingly. Somebody who is interested only in inauspicious deeds, that person cannot have the Shakti as Lakshmi with that person. That person needs the Shakti to manifest as poverty. Then only the play is complete. But both of these are not categories are good or bad. Again, don't get into the confusion that one is good, one is bad, one is ideal, one is not ideal. All these are plays, all these are games. In the same text, in the same Markandeya Purana, we also have the Aparajita Stotram. Very common. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Matrurupena Samstita Namastasye 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 Namo Namaha. This is a very common prayer which everybody prays on a daily basis, especially those who are devoted to Shakti. It's a very common prayer, Aparajita Stotram. In the same stuti, in this stotram, the Shakti is regarded as the Mata as well as the Bhranti. Mata means mother. Bhranti means totally confused. And if you can bring it to a very common level, ordinary level, we can call it as a lunatic also. So you're calling the same Shakti, I mean, you are praying, Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Matrurupena Samstita Namastasye 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 Namo Namaha. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Bhranti Rupena Samstita Namastasye 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 Namo Namaha. In the same breath, you are calling both names. Just understand that all these are only to underscore the unitary consciousness or chit, and that it is being. She who constitutes difference, when you say Kali, Bhadrakali, what does it mean? She who constitutes difference without actually being many. She constitutes difference, but she is not many. She cognizes as being different without being actually different. So she cognizes as being different. She cognizes to herself as being different, but she's not actually different. One, that single unitary consciousness. Since the absolute self is a being or being, it never ceases to exist despite our best efforts. Even if we want to destroy the absolute, we cannot destroy it because it's absolute. It's the absolute self. It is a being. We can call it a being, or it is the being. It can never cease to exist. This is why in the Sanatana Dharma, we look at life as a cyclical experience or a cyclical existence. The whole of existence is cyclical in nature. It is born, it is maintained, then it goes through pralaya, then again it appears. So this is in Shaiva, we call it as 5 important functions, eternal functions of Shiva. One is Tirodhana, I explained briefly earlier. In order for the play to begin, Shiva obscuration happens. And in that obscuration, the play begins. It appears. Creation happens. And the creation is maintained. Srishti and Sthiti happens. And when the Sthiti happens, obviously, it has to fall back. And this is called Pralaya. Some people call it Samhara, but it is called Pralaya. It all merges back. And then there is Anugraha, the supreme blessing. So these 5 eternal functions of Shiva is constantly performed by the absolute being with or without the presence of an embodiment. So that brings us to the close. I would close by saying that engaging with the world as opposed to shunning the world is the view of Sanatana Dharma. So we are taught in Sanatana Dharma to always engage with the world, take it as a supreme blessing, and see the immanent bliss in every experience that we come across. Don't shun it. The world is the absolute self itself. It is Param Shiva itself. So with that, I close today's presentation. Thank you, everybody, for patiently listening. I hope it was not too dry for all of you. And thank you very much for the patient hearing. And once again, thanks for this opportunity. God bless all of you.
Thank you very much, His Holiness, the most blessed, venerable Mahamuni Srita Mahagada, for the stunning and creative presentation. Your voice modulation and tonic expressions were extraordinary. You are a living encyclopedia in the area of Sanatana Dharma, philosophy, and historiography. Your thoughts from Shaiva literature and crucial existential questions on one's own personal identity were thrilling and thought provoking. Thank you so much for unpacking the mysteries of the dynamics of Sruti, various schools of Sanatana Dharma, various patrons, various goddesses and gods. Thank you so much for quoting Rigveda 10th Mandala. When you recited Hiranya Garbha Sukta, your tone had melted our hearts and minds. I also found the depth of philosophy in Sanatana Dharma in your presentation, where I can see the intersections related with Praja, Raksha, Sakala Prada Pradata, Yagna Purusha. It was mind-blowing to listen 6 darshanas: Mimamsa, Nyaya Darshana, Vaisheshika, Sankhya, Yoga, Uttara Mimamsa. Also Suktas, 3 modes of worship: Mantra, Yantra, Tantra. Nice to listen from you, Swamiji, about 4 Purushartha: Kamam, Artham, Dharmam, Moksham. Also 4 amazing ashramas. It was fabulous to explore the concept of Smriti, especially in the light of Bhagavad Gita. Thank you so much indeed, His Holiness, the most blessed, venerable Mahamuni Srita Mahagada, for this amazing and stunning inspirational presentation. Now I invite participants. If you have any questions, kindly type in the chat box or unmute yourself and raise your question. Over to the participants. I see one question here from Pastor Jagannath Gowda. This is, there are a number of questions. Let me summarize and put in one question. Kindly explain about Purusha Rakshaka, Praja Rakshaka, Yagna Purusha, a bit more, please.
Any more questions?
Swamiji, I don't have a question, but Namaskar, Pranam Swamiji. It just reminded me of the mantra Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. So that wholeness. I just don't remember where this mantra is from, but when you were talking, you know, this mantra was again and again coming back to me because everything is Purna.
In fact, that is the Purna mantra was one of the Shanti mantra which we always use. It is from the Yajurveda.
Yajurveda.
And it is one of the Shanti mantras. And in our system, we use that very much to say that everything is full at all times. It's one of the first mantras Gurudev, in fact, gave me. And I can't stop reciting it. I keep reciting it mentally as well as, you know, loudly. And thank you again for saying that, Deepali ji. Thank you very much. I'm blessed. Yes, Reverend Sukumarji, the question which was about the Prajarakshaka part and Sakala Philapradada, that part, right? Is that the only question we have?
And one more question. I think at present we have one question, Swamiji. Would you kindly?
Okay, great. Okay, so as I told, this particular characteristics, these are the characteristics of the golden womb. The golden womb, this is the first manifestation of what it's, when we look at God, own womb, the Hiranyagarbha came into being. So once and now this is a particular suktam which is used in the yajnas when they have to perform the yajna by offering oblations to the highest God. This particular suktam is used. And in this particular suktam, the qualities, certain qualities are mentioned. And when these qualities are present, who else will we pour our oblations to is asked by the Hotr. Hotr is the one who chants. The Hotr asked this question, who else are we going to pour our oblations to when he is doing, when this particular Hiranyagarbha is endowed with this, or this Hiranyagarbha is doing this. So this is what this Hiranyagarbha Suktam is about. I mentioned the qualities of Vishwavyapitva, Trivikramatva, Sahaja Prakashatva, Narayanatva, Prajarakshagatva, Yajna Purusha, Yajnaya Purushatva, Prajarakshagatva, Sakala Phala Pradadatva, and Satya Dharma Adi Purna. So here all basic qualities that are required, which are when you are in the sentient experience, when you and I identify as a being, as a human being, these are the things which we look for. We look for we need results, we need fruits of our actions. And so definitely when we need fruits of our actions, we need a provider of the fruits of actions. And this Hiranyagarbha is capable of providing those fruits. And another thing we need is when we live our life on a day-to-day basis, what we need is protection. So if we are not protected, we cannot sleep in the night. If we feel that somebody is going to destroy us, attack us all the while, we will not have a peaceful sleep. We'll keep waking up every now and then, in the process kill ourselves in a few days' time without adequate rest. So there should be something which is capable of giving us that sense of well-being. And this Hiranyagarbha is endowed with that particular quality also. So anything that you are looking for in the sentient life is the Hiranyagarbha is endowed with this. But the only difference here is, don't take it from a dualistic point of view as a God sitting there and I sitting here and needs protection. I am the one who is protecting myself. So that I am not different from the Hiranyagarbha. You are not different from the Hiranyagarbha. So I gave you an example as we went down towards the end. We gave the example of the Bhadrakali, the Simhavahini Bhavani, when she was manifested by the tejas of all the gods and goddesses, as well as Brahma, Vishnu, and Shankara. That Simhavahini Bhavani, from her appeared Kali, from her appeared the 64 yoginis, from her appeared the Saptamatrikas. All these were coexisting at the same time, and none of them were different from each other. They were all one and the same at the same time. So the Hiranyagarbha, the one who is seeking protection and the one who is being protected, the one who is seeking for results and the one who is giving results, it is one and the same, and that is Hiranyagarbha, and that Hiranyagarbha is you. You means it's not just you. Thank you.
Swamiji, thank you so much. One question came from Kalpana Raja. Pranam Guruji. How can you relate suffering with bliss? There is so much suffering and death at present due to COVID-19. How can you relate this to bliss?
Kalpana, that is a very apt question. When we experience suffering, even when a small mosquito bites you, I ask that question, how can this be bliss? But what is being said here is that at the base, at the core of every experience, whether it is a painful experience or a good experience or a pleasurable experience, it is immanent Anand.
Swamiji, you are muted. Swamiji, you are muted. Mahamuni.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I think I got disconnected in between. Sorry about that. So, did you hear at least some part of what I said about that question?
Not really. So you can begin again.
Sorry about that. So this particular question about the suffering. See, even I was telling, even when a small mosquito bites us, it leaves an impression, and that when that particular impression is happening on our physical body, that also goes into our mind. How the questioner is asking, how Kalpana is asking, how we can treat it as bliss. We should not look at only the experience that is happening on the peripheral level. The bliss is being spoken of as what is at the substratum, or what is at the underlying level of every experience we have, irrespective of what is going on. It is the bliss is a characteristic, and we also saw that this is a play. So the absolute bliss, so the absolute self goes through a function called tirodhana. It shrinks itself to project this whole existence into, or this whole appearance. And then in that appearance, it assumes various names and forms, which is X, Y, Z, you and me, everybody. And because of this, it experiences what is called particular interaction. And as a result of this tirodhana, what is called as suffering, etc., is felt. But is this the absolute reality? Is this suffering the reality? The suffering is just a passing phase. It will not stay at all. At that particular point, the Shaiva system is such that if you pay attention to the pain with which you are going through, or the pain that is happening on your body or in your mind, you will be able to transcend that pain into the immanent bliss that is present. The problem which we experience in a day-to-day life is we do not pay attention. When something happens, we try to get rid of it. When we try to get rid of it, we are going further into the game. We are entering into the next level of the play. We are taking, we want to experience the further experiences. Instead of that, if you feel that it is suffering, pay attention right at that point. Close your eyes with the grace of the Guru. Practice any particular dharana at that point of time. In the beginning, I told about staring into the night sky, one of the dharanas which are mentioned in the Shaiva system. Instead of staring into the night sky, you stare into that particular pain, whether it is a mental pain or a physical pain. You will see that that particular pain is disintegrating. Any pain, no pain can hold on when your attention focuses. When I was explaining about the appearance of the Simhavahini Bhavani, this exactly the Tejas. We have what is called Tejas in all of us. This Tejas is our inherent Shakti. When the Shakti lies dormant, now I have to go into what you call as Kundalini. So when the Shakti lies dormant in the Kundalini, or stays at the level of the Mooladhara, everything becomes overwhelming to us. You heard also when we discussed about the Bhagavad Gita, the 11th discourse, the Arjuna receiving the divine eye, the Divya Chakshu. How did he receive the Divya Chakshu? How did he receive the divine eye? Of course, by Anugraha, by the grace of the Guru, he received the Divya Chakshu. But at the same time, he made an effort to receive it. The question, the seeking that happened there. So if we are determined that we are not going to view this life as a suffering, then we will be able to come out of it just like the snap of a finger. It is as easy as that. But again, how do you reconcile it when so much of death and pain is going on around it? Let me tell you, in actuality, this is all happening only in the level of the mind. I'm by no way I'm discounting the the emotions that people go through when somebody is suffering around them. But it's all experienced in the level of the mind. And if you are able to control your mind there, control not through suppression, but through dharana. That is why dharanas are very important. Dharanas are the techniques of meditation. And this will help you rise beyond what your mind is telling you. In the whole presentation, you saw that I didn't use the word mind. We're talking about chitta, consciousness. We're talking about what is happening in the level of the consciousness, not on the level of the mind. If you remain in the level of the mind is just another sense organ, like the other sense organs, like your skin, like your eyes, like your ears, like your nose, like your tongue. It's another sense organ. So if you subject yourself to what your mind is telling you, you will always stay deluded. You will not be able to come out of this game. Okay, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Swamiji. There are also some thanks from gratitude from my friend Mario from Argentina. He's a retired professor. He joined today and he said, thank you so much and blessing. And Edelweiss Quadros, ma'am, she said, thank you, Sri Mahamuni, very thought-provoking. Samuel John Dinakaran, thank you very much, Swamiji, for that eye-opening thoughts.
Could I ask a question?
Yes, please, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Swamiji. I think when I was listening to you, it was an experience in itself. So really, thank you, because to be able to give us so much in such a short time is a gift. I was wondering, when you speak about the absolute shrinking and taking sentient forms, what is the purpose of this play? Why does this play happen, and where is it supposed to? Why does the absolute shrink and take these forms? Is it only in the mind, or how do we understand this play?
Sherilyn, that is the perennial question. Why did the absolute choose to play? It is simply stated that the great masters of Pashupata always say that if the absolute is free to do as it chooses, then what kind of absolute it is? The absolute has the freedom to do what it wants. And but when we look at from where we are as embodied beings, from the realm of suffering, from what we are going through, we may feel it is sometimes we may look at it as a cruelty. As I said in response to Kalpana's question, it's because we are thinking from the mind. Here, for the absolute, the mind is not a faculty at all. When it becomes embodied, in order to receive the experiences, the indriyas come into play. The panchendriyas, the karmendriyas, everything, all those indriyas come into play. And mind is one of those indriyas, which is required to process all the information and give you an effect. If there is no effect, it's like when you receive a message on your phone or on your laptop, you need to have a pop-up sound. Then when that effect comes, you suddenly are woken up into the presence of a new message. So similarly, mind just wakes you up into some current that is suddenly appearing in the consciousness, that's all. And if we can remove the mind, or if we can subtract the mind from all these experiences, then this divine play is a very blissful experiences. So that is why in Sanatana Dharma, all practices are aimed at stilling the mind. If you look at any spiritual practice, irrespective of any school, whether it is a dualistic school or a monistic school or a non-dualistic school, every school aims at stillness of the mind. If the mind, you cannot be, the dualists talk about sarupya with their Ishtadevta or their chosen deity, oneness with their deity. Even in Shaiva, we do have the concept of sarupya when the dualistic schools of Shaiva. There also, if I give importance to my priorities or what my mind is particularly experiencing, I will not be able to play out the desire of Shiva. So I have to subdue my individual mind in order to enter into the mind of Shiva and exist on the level of his play. So why this divine play began by the absolute self? No schools have ever answered it. The Pashupatas, the school which I belong to, our masters have answered it in such a way that it is the Swatantra, it is the supreme freedom of the absolute self. And in that freedom, he keeps on performing these 5 eternal functions. That is Tirodhana, Srishti, Sthiti, Pralaya, and Anugraha. This keeps on going and it will never have an end, just as it never had a beginning in itself, because it's an ever existent being. It's forever existent. In the limited time, let me stop with that, but I'll be happy to continue.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, so much.
Yeah,
Thank you, Shirley.
Swamiji, so Mahamuni, in the Jewish tradition, almost this shrinking concept is also there. The creation, according to the Jewish concept, I forgot exactly what is the Hebraic word. So I heard from some of these Jewish theologians that, you know, the creation itself is a shrinking and expanding from Yahweh or God himself or herself. So we can see that, you know, these concepts are not only in one tradition, but also it is a universal one. And I must thank Mahamuni for this splendid, very creative and dynamic exposition, because this is a new way of looking at, you know, the unitary consciousness. And I must thank you for this wonderful exposition. I also thank Reverend Sukumar for the great moderator's job he has done, introduced Mahamuni. So thank you so much, Reverend Sukumar. We have also, as Sukumar already said, that, you know, Mario from Argentina, we have Daniel from UK, we have Maria Lyuteva from Russia, and I am sure that, you know, there are also many others from different traditions, different countries. So it was a wonderful coming together and listening to this splendid talk. And our question is, describe how Sanatana Dharma drives us towards a unitary consciousness. So as Mahamuni, we have already said that we give a question so that they can reflect more. So today's question will be, describe how Sanatana Dharma drives us towards a unitary consciousness.
Thank you, Father.
Yes.
That's a simple question, isn't it, Father? Or is it difficult?
Depends, you know. But listening to Mahamuni, I think that, you know, you will be able to, because Mahamuni elaborated very well, you know, how this unitary consciousness from the Sruti, from the Smriti, from Gita and Purusharthas, all those, you know, he very well explained. So this could also be a thesis as well, but
Yes.
we only have 400 words. Milun, are you there?
Yes, Father.
Yes, Father.
Okay. So you can speak about what would be the next one.
Okay. Our next lecture will be on 15th July. That means next Thursday. On the top, and the speaker will be Bishop Nityanandam, Bishop of Vellore Diocese of the Church of South India, on Ida Scudder. Ida Scudder is the founder of CMC Vellore.
So next Thursday we assemble again through Zoom, and Bishop Nityanandam of the Vellore Diocese will be speaking on the great humanist medical doctor, Dr. Ida Skadar, the founder of Vellur Christian Medical College. So thank you to all, and great see you again on next Thursday. Thank you, Mahamani and Reverend Sukumar, for this wonderful, and all the participants.
Namaste, namaste.
Thank you, Father. Thank you,
Thank
Father.
you. Thank you. Thank you, Sukumar.